Hey everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going over my favorite books of 2022. This is always one of my favorite videos every single year. I love to watch them. I love to make them. It's just such a fun video because you get to just rave about all your favorite books for the year. Also, if my voice sounds a little raspy, I had the flu, which caused me to lose my voice, and it's mostly back now, but it's not 100% back. Plus, I worked a full 8-hour shift today, so I had to talk and stuff like that. So if my voice is a little funky, I'm sorry. And also, if the lighting's a little funky, I'm sorry. I had to do some ghetto setup because normally I don't film at night, at least when I'm at my parents' house, so I had to do a little finagling to get it to be lit. So I have a top 10 and then I have 5 honorable mentions, and basically I was able to rank all my books between basically like 15, my honorable mentions, all the way up until number like 6. My top 5 though was very hard for me to rank, and they're basically not ranked. My top 5 are just my favorite books of the year because I was not able to rank them. I basically do have like a top 3, but the top 5 is really hard. But the top 3, I did not know what order to put them in at all, so I don't know. I just chose one to talk about last, but it's very hard for me to rank the top 5, especially the top 3. So as I said, I have 5 honorable mentions, so I'm not going to go into them as in depth, but the first one that I have is Wash Day Diaries, and this one's actually a graphic novel that I read, and in this one we follow 4 different black girls, and they're all in the same friend group. We just get a little sneak peek into their lives and the issues that they're facing and the struggles that they're going through, but also the amazing things that are going on in their lives and their friendship all between each other in the group, because we do see them interact, and also how they do their hair, because if you don't know, in the black community, washing your hair is a big task. Usually most people have a wash day, which I definitely have a wash day, so it's a diary about all these 4 girls in this friend group, their wash day diaries, and we talk about so many other themes and topics and so many issues that black women face. It was just such an amazing graphic novel, and it's probably one of my favorite graphic novels. That and Saga are like my absolute favorites. And then coming in at number 14 is a little bit untraditional for me, but that is Razor Blade Tears. I know this one was kind of controversial, and in this one we follow Ike and Buddy Lee, and they are the parents of this gay couple that was murdered, and so they are kind of teaming up together to try and solve who killed their sons. But it's also an exploration about racism and homophobia and trying to deconstruct that in yourself, especially for older generations that grew up with homophobia and racism, and it's very much ingrained into them, how to deconstruct that for the people around you and to show them that you really do truly love them and how you want to be better for them. And this did go into a direction that's not my favorite in thrillers, but I still absolutely really just loved the story, and I thought it was so heartfelt but heartbreaking. You see how much these characters grew, and I know for some people that's not gonna work, but I have older parents. My dad, he's almost 60 and he is a white man, and he definitely has some ideals that boomer white men have that I don't necessarily agree with, but I do my best to try and educate him, and he does his best to try and grow and understand and to be better. And I think as a society we need to be more understanding for people who are trying to do better, because just trying to shut them out is not always the solution. It's not always gonna work. Sometimes I'm still like that. I'm guilty of it, and I think that's okay to have that reaction. But again, some people are not going to change unless you are a little bit more empathetic. You could still be forceful and firm, but this also shows how far empathy can go. Next up on my list is another thriller. I think I have like a ton of thrillers and horror on this year, which I love, and that is Stillhouse Lake. I really did love this one. Everybody told me I was gonna love this, and I actually really did. This one follows our main character Gina, and she was just a shy, normal suburban housewife in the Midwest when one day a man drives his car into her house, and this gaping hole reveals that her husband in the garage has actually been killing people and is a serial killer. And so she takes her 2 children and kind of runs away, and she has kind of people chasing after her in this book. Her husband is in prison. I think it's her ex-husband by the time we get to this book, but he is in prison, but he does have people working for him. And there also are people on the internet who think that she was involved because they don't believe that there was any way for her to not know what was going on just in her own garage. So she kind of has like her ex-husband serial killer trying to come after her, and then also these people on the internet who hate her. So she's changed her identity many times, her and her kids, and she decides to try and finally settle down at this place called Stillhouse Lake because she wants to provide stability for her children. She knows that this constant moving around and changing their identity is not good for them. But just as she starts to settle down, these murders actually start to happen, and these bodies are washing up on this lake that she lives on with her kids. And then also she's starting to get these threatening letters. And I just loved motherhood and how it was explored in this book. I actually really do love themes of motherhood in my thrillers, and this one just did it so well. I just had such a good time reading this, and I just loved Gina so much, and I loved her story, and I can't wait to continue on in the rest of the series. Coming in at number 12 for my honorable mentions is For the Sake of, and this is an extreme horror, which I did not know that I would have on this list, but I really had such an amazing time reading this, and this book did what no other book has ever done for me before. I read Survivor earlier this year, and I thought that one was crazy. It really humbled me because I thought that I could handle anything, and I could barely handle Survivor, and this one takes it up a notch. This book literally had me gagging on a public bus. I literally went like on a bus because it was just that nasty. I don't know what possessed me to read this on the bus, but if you've read Survivor or Pretty Girls, something like that, combined kind of with Squid Games a little bit, because this book kind of follows this game that these people put on. And so there's one man who mostly runs it, and he basically takes someone's loved one and kidnaps them and holds them for ransom, telling these people that they have to do these different tasks to save their loved one, or else they're going to get killed or maimed, and in the end, if they don't do the final task, their loved one does end up getting killed. He films all of it, records it, and sends it off to people on the internet, and they pay him, and they just eat it up. They love these sick, horrific things. They're watching these people basically go through torture willingly. In this, we specifically followed one woman, and her child was taken and just disappeared one day. So it's been a couple months, and she starts getting like these letters saying that they have her child and that she has these tasks that she needs to do. Well, she got like a phone inside of a letter, which they were texting her, and she does some crazy things that I would never ever think of in my entire life. There are some horrible things, and if you think you can handle extreme horror, I would still be wary of this one because it really did go to such a nasty place. And then this book was absolutely so heart-wrenching in the end. And if you read the author's note of this book, I think it really sheds a lot of light on why Judith wrote this book and a lot of the meaning behind it. This book really had me tearing up at the end. Like, I did not think this book that would gross me out, have me gagging on a bus, would have me almost in tears because of what happened at the end. It was just so amazing, and the writing is phenomenal. Moving on to number 11, I have another thriller, and that is Blindsided. I had to add a Karen on this list, and this is the first book in the Grant County series. Karen Slaughter is basically like the extreme horror of thrillers, and I really love it. Her writing is like a drug to me. It's so addictive and dark and sinister. Her books do go into very dark themes. I know later books in the series, I haven't gotten to them yet, but they deal with like child pee and stuff like that, so that could be really dark. And Pretty Girls is pretty dark, and this one is as well, but not as much as like Pretty Girls for me. But this one is darker than, I would say, The Good Daughter. In this one, we follow our main character Sarah, and the town that she lives in is so small that she's a pediatrician, and so she's actually also like the medical examiner slash coroner. So she actually finds someone's dead body in a diner in town, and she was viciously raped and also had some markings on her. Then a couple days later, another victim is found crucified, and she also has an ex-husband, and he is the police chief, and so they kind of work together because, you know, she's a medical examiner. She found the body as well, and then he is the police chief, and so we also kind of get some dynamics about a divorced couple, which I found super entertaining because they are a very civil divorced couple, and I thought that was really good representation. I really enjoyed that. And as I said, I just love Karen Slaughter's writing so much, and her themes and topics, that I had to at least put her in my honorable mentions. So now we're finally getting into my top 10 books. I know the honorable mentions took a second, but I like to talk. So the first one that I have at number 10 is The Simple Wild. This book I did not expect to be on this list. It was very much out of left field, but this book had me cry. This was the only book this year that's made me cry. Like, I think I've teared up at a couple of the books, but this book made me absolutely sob. So in this book we follow our main character Kala, and when she was like less than 2 years old, her mother took her and fled Alaska because that's where her family lived. Her dad, her, and her mom lived in Alaska, and so she fled Alaska with Kala, and now she's 26 years old and she doesn't really blink twice. They left behind her father, but he still lives in Alaska. She has a little bit of contact with him, but she kind of just living her life in her 20s in the big city. But then she gets a phone call telling her that her father, Ren, is now on his last days because he has cancer. So she decides, because she never really got to bond with her dad, that she's going to go to Alaska for a bit and spend some time with him, bond. And she ends up falling in love with this little town in Alaska, and also falling in love with a man while she is there. So this is a romance, but I feel like this is so much more than a romance. That's my favorite type of romance, is a romance that has something to say. I think this hit so hard for me because I was such a daddy's girl growing up. My dad, he is disabled. He has epilepsy. We found out about it when I was 5. So while I can remember that he was having seizures and stuff like that, and I think like the thought of losing my dad is just something that's so horrifying to me. It's one of my worst fears, is just losing my parents in general, because I love them so much, and I've never really had a big death really like impact me before. My grandparents all died before I was born for the most part, so I never really had to go through losing a grandparent or anything like that. And so this just really discussed like one of my greatest fears in life that I know is eventually going to come. So I think that's why this one really did impact me so much. But this one is so amazing, and if you kind of have similar feelings, I think that this one could be one that you absolutely love. This also has to do a lot with flying planes, and this also talks a little bit about the indigenous community. I didn't find much own voices reviews talking about the indigenous community, but I did enjoy some of the talking about how the communities that are more rural are impacted by living in Alaska, a place that doesn't get many resources or have much travel. Next up at number 9 is another romance, and that is A Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. This is one that I read for my book club that I run with Nicole from Who Picked This Book, our Twin Sisters Romance Book Club, and this one is another romance that has something to say. So in this book we follow our main character Iris, and in the beginning she is like the girlfriend of a famous college basketball player. He's very, very well known, like going to go pro type beat. And also in the beginning of this, she is going to this tournament with her boyfriend, and he's like in the hotel, you know, chilling. He's trying to rest up for his game that he has the next day. And the reason that this game is so big is because he is playing against his main rival, August. August and her boyfriend have been rivals all throughout college, kind of pinned against each other. And so this game is really huge for them. It's one of their major last basketball games of their college careers. And both of them are going to the NBA, so it's kind of like a really crazy game. And so she really also is into sports. She wants to be like a sports manager. So she's trying to break into that industry throughout this whole book. But so she wants to watch the specific game, sports game that's on TV. So she leaves the hotel and goes to this bar or diner or something that's nearby, and while she's there she ends up meeting August. Iris knows who August is, but August does not know who Iris is when they first meet. And so they kind of have like a connection, but she's like, no, I can't do this. She just goes back to the hotel. And then the next day they have their game, and so at the game August then realizes that Iris is the girlfriend of his rival. And that is something that really traumatizes him, because he had such a strong connection with her, and he knows that this man is not a good man. And we don't really see it revealed until a little bit later on in the book, but he is very abusive to Iris, and he starts to get more abusive as time goes on. In the beginning, when they're just in college, he's not really abusive, and he starts to get more abusive as time goes on. The romance is between Iris and August, and it happens more towards the end of the book, years down the line. This is one of the most realistic portrayals of domestic abuse that I've ever read about, and I just think that the way that it was done was so realistic, to see how people can get truly trapped and feel like they have no other options. And this one I think did it in a very unique way, because I feel like there's definitely like multiple different ways that you can go about that, especially with people who live in poverty and what that's like. But Iris is a little bit more privileged. She has never had to work for herself. She doesn't have her own money, and that is something that really plays a big part in this. And I thought that was such a beautiful display of how sometimes people get trapped because they don't they've never had a job, they don't have experience, they don't have money, they don't have anything in their own name, no house, no car, nothing, and how that can truly lead to being trapped and having no other option. And it was just so beautiful. Next up is another thriller. I told you I have a lot of them on this list, and that is The Last Housewife. And this is another book that has so much to say about women and what women go through. This book follows our main character Shay, and when she was in college she had two best friends. In this book we follow our main character Shay, and Shay had two best friends in college, and one of them did end up dying towards the end of their time in college, which was deemed a suicide, and Shay doesn't necessarily believe that, but that's what it was deemed to be. And this takes place 8 years after her senior year in college, and she's just kind of like a little housewife in Texas, and she's built an entire life for herself and basically really tries to hide her past because her and her two friends went through a really horrifying experience in college with a man. She finds out that the other friend that she had died in a manner that was very, very similar to their friend in college, and she does not believe for a second that it was suicide. So she goes back to the place that she vowed that she would never go, and goes back to their college town, and she also recruits their friend that she had in college, who basically has like a true crime podcast, and he more like reaches out to her on the podcast, and she just happened to listen to it. So we do get kind of mixed media elements in here. She gets wrapped up in this dark, secretive world of privilege and power. And this is one that I truly want to reread because I feel like there was so much that I missed on the first read. So this might be one that I do reread in 2023 because I think this book is truly like an onion. It's so deep and has so many layers that I just feel like I need to read it again to truly grasp the gravity of this book. It talked about so many things that women go through and how men truly can impact women so much, and almost like grooming and what young girls go through with older men. And that's just a theme that really resonates with me. Just that whole idea and concept is something that I think is so important and under talked about, is grooming in general, and how men, older men specifically, have power over younger women, even if they're not underage like our main characters aren't, even if they're in college. It can still have such long lasting impacts, and even though you may be an adult, that doesn't mean that you truly understand the danger that someone could have over you. And I just thought it was done so absolutely beautifully throughout this book. And if you are looking for something that's feminist but a little bit more gritty and darker, next up at number 7 I have To Be Devoured, and this is actually a horror novella. In this book we follow our main character, and I don't want to go into too much because I feel like it's hard to describe this book, but it follows a woman and she starts to have an interest in vultures. She's always kind of had an interest in different things, specifically like nature related things. She had like an interest in like moths and butterflies and stuff like that, but now she's kind of taken an interest to vultures and meat and scavenging and stuff like that, and it kind of goes to a very dark place. She's also in a relationship, and that has a big part to do with what happens in this novella, and this one just really stuck with me. I thought that it was so beautifully done, the way that you can see the mental health of the main character unraveling. You really feel like you're unraveling with her, and I thought that that was so amazingly done. So the next one is another novella, and that is They Were Here Before Us by Eric LaRocca. I'm kind of putting this in as a stand-in for all the Eric LaRocca that I read this year. This is just the only one. The other ones are over there and I don't feel like grabbing them. I truly did love reading from Eric LaRocca this year. He became one of my favorite authors this year because all I read last year was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which was also on my favorite books of last year. So I ended up reading this one, We Can Never Leave This Place, and You've Lost a Lot of Blood this year, and this one is my favorite for sure. I also really did love We Can Never Leave This Place. You've Lost a Lot of Blood is also amazing, but it's not one of my favorites. The other two are, but this one was my favorite. This one is actually this one's actually a novella in pieces. It's kind of told in little vignettes. I believe there's really like 5 stories in here, and it really discusses the themes of like they were here before us, of how nature is here before humans and it will be here after humans, and also it discusses a lot of what's on the back. It says the only thing more brutal than nature is love, and it talks about how they were here before us, nature, the nature cycle, and how things are always cycling, and how that also relates to love. So many different kinds of love were explored throughout this short little 100-piece novella, and I just think that Eric LaRocca does everything so beautiful every time. I love Eric LaRocca's writing. It's some of my favorite writing, and I just think that this is so beautiful and horrifying. But I think that this is so like beautiful and horrifying, and it uses horror to show something so beautiful, but also how something that we think is beautiful, like love, can be horrifying, and how it can drive so many different things. But also how that relates to nature. As I said, We Can Never Leave This Place truly sent me down a rabbit hole. When I finished that, I literally spent the whole rest of the night researching it, like interviews, trying to watch interviews that Eric LaRocca did for that book release, trying to understand more of that novella. I just wanted to know more and to understand the ending more, because it completely flips the story on its head right at the end, and it just had me on the edge of my seat. Eric LaRocca, as I said, is going to eat and deliver every single time. Gonna do it for me. I can't wait to read their upcoming releases, and I hopefully want to do a video in 2023 where I read like Eric LaRocca's backlist, because there are a couple things that came out prior to them really like blowing up last year in 2021 that I haven't read. I kind of want to just read everything Eric LaRocca has ever written. So now we're getting into my top 5. As I said, these ones I really could not rank. This was very difficult for me. But the first one I'm going to talk about is Gone to See the Riverman. This is another horror novella, and this one I loved. So this one was actually on my 12 books to read, recommended by 12 friends to read in 12 months. And this one was recommended to me by Marcy from Marcy Reads. So thank you, Marcy. I made sure to ask her again specifically to recommend me a book for this year, because I did not think this was gonna eat the way that it ate. Okay, this really slayed the house boots down. Okay, it was just so good. This is a horror novella that's going to go in a completely different direction than what you think. So this follows a woman, and she's kind of like a serial killer groupie. You know, those women that were all like, oh, like, because they glorify serial killers, and like they're like the ones who like want to get married to them and have kids with them and visit them in prison and write letters to them. Well, that's her. She writes letters to this serial killer and goes to visit him in prison, and one time that she goes to visit him, he gives her this task that she needs to go to basically his old cabin, get something, and go find the Riverman, and she needs to give it to him. You think that this one is going to be like, okay, serial killers, and that's where the horror is going to come in, but no. This is kind of almost like a cosmic horror. I don't know. It just goes into a completely different direction. It literally feels like a fever dream. And I've said that about other books before, but this one truly is like a fever dream, and it just blows your mind. This is literally mind-bending, mind-boggling. It just is so crazy. And this also, our main character, she has a disabled sister, and she brings her along for this adventure because she takes care of her. That has a big part to do with this, and there is something really big in here that there's actually a couple pretty big things in here, but one of them, if you know, you know, that had me quaking in my Crocs. I was shook, I was shaken, I was just so shocked. I did not see it coming. It really came out of left field, and it just really was crazy to me. But I just absolutely enjoyed my whole experience reading this, and it is obviously one of my favorite horror novellas that I've ever read. So this next book was actually my favorite book for a very long time this year, because in the beginning I feel like I really wasn't reading like 5 stars. I was reading good books, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't reading like favorites of all time type books. Like most of these I read in the summer or in the second half of the year. Like, so for those first like 4 or 5 months I didn't really read anything that I was absolutely loving too much, except for this book, and that is There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This is a serial killer romance that I don't know, it just really did something for me. Most of the romances, as I said, that I love are ones that really have something to say and that I connect with, and this one was not that. This one, as I said, it's a serial killer romance. It doesn't have too much to say necessarily, but I just loved the experience of reading this. I loved how dark it was. This book takes place on the art scene, I believe, in San Francisco, and so we follow 2 characters, Mara and Cole. So Cole is a serial killer who's also a very famous artist. artist. He's very like acclaimed. He has like art in galleries, and he has hella money, not just from art, from his family and other endeavors that he has, but he is like known to be an amazing artist. And he actually has like this rival who is also an acclaimed artist who is also a serial killer, and they're kind of rival serial killers. They have different MOs and they kill like different people. They are still rivals because they have more of like this art rivalry, and they both know each other are serial killers, but like nobody else knows. So one day Cole goes to this art gallery, and Mara, our heroine, is there. And Mara is a starving artist. She lives in a terrible like attic of an apartment. She lives with so many other people in this apartment. She barely has like clothes, food, whatever, but she is trying to, you know, live her dream and make art. So she is also at this event, and Cole, he is a very interesting character to me because he's not interested in the trivial like mundane people things. He thinks people are really stupid actually, and kind of finds them boring and doesn't think that they really have anything meaningful going on in their lives. But Mara kind of catches his attention by something that she does, but he's more of just like interest piqued, and is like looks at her a little bit, but nothing too crazy. But the other serial killer actually sees this at the event, and time skips forward a little bit, and him and the other serial killer are actually at another event. And so Cole actually ends up saying to the other serial killer like, oh, like you are very erratic and you don't have any control over yourself, and that shows like in your art and in your killings. And because of that obviously pisses off the other serial killer, so he decides to try and take Mara and like cuts her, leaves her bleeding, and ties her up in like kind of like bondage type stuff, and leaves her on this land that Cole owns, to try and like entice him to participate in a kill that's a little bit more erratic and uncontrolled, to try and like basically be like F you. So he ends up literally leaving her like with slashes so deep that she's basically bleeding out, and Cole does end up finding her, and she's kind of like, why isn't this man helping me? Like, well, she was also blindfolded, so she doesn't know who did this to her and if that's Cole or not, but she does see Cole, but is kind of like out of it because she was bleeding to death. But Cole ends up seeing her, looks at her, and is like whatever, and leaves her for dead. So she starts to bleed out, is about to die, but then she's like, no, like I'm not gonna die, not today, Satan, I'm gonna leave this place. So she ends up untying herself and running to the road, and she gets seen by somebody. She ends up surviving, and Cole sees it in the paper, and that is what really draws him in to Mara, the fact that she was able to survive. And he begins to stalk her. He literally rents the Airbnb across the street from her so he could put like a telescope and watch her through her windows and stuff, but they do end up having a romance. Cole is one of the most fascinating characters that I've ever read. He just is so interesting in the way that he just is not entertained by people and doesn't really like them, but I just loved the serial killer and stalking elements. I didn't know if I would, but I just really ate this book up. And as I said, this one was really my favorite for like the first like 4 or 5 months of the year. I just really loved this book so much. It was so phenomenal, and I can't wait to finish off the duology. I really was trying to finish it off this year, but I didn't end up getting to the second book, which some people actually like the second book more than the first book, and some people like this one more, but normally people give them both 5 stars, so I think I'm gonna love it regardless. So I'm super excited to see where Mara and Cole's story goes. So moving on into my top 3, these ones I really cannot rank at all, but the first one I have is The Weight of Blood. This is my favorite retelling that I've ever read. I loved this book so much. This is a Carrie retelling, and so this one's actually retold obviously by Tiffany D. Jackson, from a black lens, and it is like more modern day. Like in this book we follow our main character, and she has kind of hidden her black identity. She's very light skinned, and she straightens her hair, and she literally does not go to school if it's raining that day, nothing, because her father, who's actually white, she's biracial, her father's white and her mom was black. Her mother is not in the picture, but her father does not want her to be found out as black at all. He basically is like ashamed of the fact that she's black and doesn't want anybody to know that he has a black child. So he's really the one that pressures her to like straighten her hair. He basically like silk presses her hair every day. This day she ends up going, and it rains unexpectedly, and she's actually on the track running for gym, and her teacher would not let her go inside, so her hair ends up blowing up super big, getting super frizzy and curly, and everybody finds out that she's black. And in this town as well, the prom is put on privately, and so because of that, basically all the white people in the town put on their own prom and leave the black people to their own devices. And so there's only really like a couple other black characters in this book, and there is actually like a popular like black athlete, which I really loved his story. And I think that's such amazing commentary, because a lot of times black people in an educational setting can only really get any sort of popularity or be seen as good if they have some sort of athletic ability that they bring to the table, which I think was a great discussion that was had in this. And so the rest of the story is kind of basically Carrie retold, and so it has to do with the segregated prom, and she actually ends up going to the first integrated prom, and that's where the Carrie, you know, the infamous prom scene with the pig's blood, stuff like that, that's when all that goes down. But it is kind of more modern day and told through a black lens, and I just love the themes of this book so much. And you can tell how much effort Tiffany D. Jackson put into the story. Every single little thing in this book is not by chance, and I know you could say that for most books, but you can just tell that she truly plotted every word of this book, and how every single word, scene, instance, reference literally connects to the original book or has some sort of connection. And I actually read this for the Full Moon Book Club. It was by my friend Jan Agaton, and we had a whole live show discussion on this, and I would highly recommend checking out that discussion if you want more thoughts and opinions, because we go through like this whole book, and that was like such an amazing live show and experience that it made me just adore this book even more. And it was just so phenomenal, and I loved the writing. I love Tiffany D. Jackson. She's also one of my favorite authors, as well as Eric LaRocca, and so I just really loved everything this book had to say, and the themes and the story, and how it took this classic story that we all know and just flipped it on its head. And I know some people thought it stuck too close to the original source material, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. So moving on to the next one, I think this one might be my favorite. I don't know, like, it's hard, but that is Black Girl Unlimited. This one really surprised me. It took me off guard because I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I knew that I was going to like it, but I didn't expect to have it so high up on this list, because it's actually kind of like a non-fiction memoir, but it is told in kind of like a novel, and it also has a magical realism and stuff like that woven into the story. So this book follows our main character Echo, and she is a wizard, and that's really where the magical realism comes in, because we kind of know that Echo's not really like a wizard in the traditional sense, at least, but she is a wizard. And so she lives on the east side, which is a very black and more urban, poor area of Cleveland, and she ends up transferring to a rich white high school on the opposite side of town. And this kind of opens up portals where she leaves behind her family and friends every day, and her siblings, to go to this school on the other side of town. And this one was just one of the most realistic portrayals of the black experience that I've ever seen, like a black girl's experience specifically, not like black men, not older black women, specifically black girls in high school. This is just such a realistic portrayal of every single issue that they go through. This one is truly heartbreaking, and you really genuinely need to be in such a good headspace to read this book, because it will rip out your heart. It will stomp on it. It will be very traumatizing. It talks about so many issues in such like amazing ways. You would think that because this deals with so many issues and is not so like concentrated into one idea and theme and issue, you would think that it wouldn't be as potent, or that it wouldn't be as meaningful, but it was still incredibly meaningful, and as I said, heartbreaking. This book truly broke my heart and just meant so much to me, because I could just relate to Echo so much on so many different fronts, but also there were so many things about her experience that I couldn't relate to, that I've never experienced, and I just loved seeing that, and especially through this magical realism lens. I think it was just done so beautifully, and I think Echo Brown just did such an amazing job writing this book. And the last book that I'm going to be talking about today is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is another romance, and I absolutely love this one. This is what Colleen Hoover wanted It Ends With Us to be. This is such a meaningful romance story. In this we follow two main characters, obviously a hero and heroine, and our hero and heroine, they knew each other when they were teenagers, and they have secretly been writing to each other in their books because they're actually both authors. They've been secretly writing to each other throughout their books, and they actually end up meeting once again years later. So our main character, she like has a child and everything, but they end up meeting and reconnecting, but we also explore their story from the past. This one deals more with drugs and young love. So I've never really seen that drug kind of representation in a book before, so I really actually enjoyed seeing that, and how these two people, they had nothing. They had nobody else. They had nothing, and how they just wanted to escape, and they decided to escape within each other and within drugs, and how that creates a bonded relationship, but also how that is not necessarily toxic. And I thought it was just so beautiful. As I keep saying throughout this, it's just, these books are either horrifying, meaningful, beautiful. That's kind of where I land. And I just loved seeing their story and their romance, because as I said, this one just really hit home with the themes, and I think it was just one of the best romances that I've ever read, and I love a black romance. So those are all my favorite books of the year. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, but some of these were really unexpected, some of them were expected, but I would love to hear if you have read any of these, if you love them. Please don't tell me if you hated them, because it'll make me cry, but leave me one of your favorite books down below. And also I would like you to leave the little like 3 sparkle emoji. I'll put it up here. I always put it up here, but it's like the 3 little stars with like, it's kind of like a sparkle glimmer thing, because that's one of my favorite emojis, and these are some of my favorite books. So just leave that emoji down below for me, and I will see y'all in my next one. Bye everybody.